I commit to telling the truth from this podium every single day. I commit to speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. That is my job. And I will say it's very easy to speak truth from this podium when you have a president who is implementing policies that are wildly popular with the American people, and that's exactly what this administration is doing.
The camera catches the flash of cameras. A podium gleams under the bright lights of the White House press room. Behind it stands a 27-year-old woman in a sharply tailored blazer, her expression firm, her voice unwavering. I commit to telling the truth from this podium every single day, says Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history. For a moment, the room seems to hold its breath. It's a bold promise, one that carries weight, especially in an era when truth is constantly pulled between politics, performance, and perception. The press pool listens, pens ready. Viewers at home lean in. And for Karoline, this isn't just a job, it's a battlefield. Every word must walk a tightrope between message, discipline, and moral conviction. But the promise is tested almost immediately. Karoline's early briefings are marked by polished statements and confident posture, yet quickly reveal a pattern. When asked to clarify the administration's stance on tariffs, she doesn't provide figures or explain mechanisms. She instead accuses the reporter of insulting her understanding of economics. When questioned about global reaction to the president's remarks, she pivots to populist talking points. And when challenged on the contradiction between the president's tweets and official data, she simply reframes the narrative as media distortion. At first, it seems like growing pains. After all, press secretaries are expected to protect the president, not expose his flaws. But this wasn't just another spokesperson. Karoline entered with a declaration to speak truth, not spin. That difference matters, especially for a generation of Americans weary of word games and rhetorical gymnastics. Her commitment carried the implicit hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth could return to the podium. What followed, however, exposed the impossible task of being both loyalist and truth-teller in a White House that often demands contradiction. The problem isn't that Karoline lied, it's that she was asked to translate chaos into coherence and pretend that confusion was clarity. There's something revealing in how fast a noble promise can erode when placed under pressure. It's easy to speak of truth on day one. It's harder when that truth begins to collide with policy contradictions, ego-driven decisions, and late-night tweets from a former president known for rewriting reality in real time. For those watching, the lesson wasn't about Karoline's character, it was about the system that swallowed her intentions. A bright, ambitious communicator was handed the impossible assignment to explain what often made no sense and to defend what could not be justified. Still, Karoline stood firm. Still, she smiled. Still, she returned to the podium the next day. But, while she was defending a president, someone else was preparing to make her the punchline, not with policy, not with facts, but with the kind of sarcasm that slices deeper than statistics ever could. And when the curtain rose on late-night television, the real battle for public perception began. Just hours after Karoline Leavitt's truth pledge echoed through the White House press room, another voice picked it up, this time from the opposite coast owner studio lights, in front of a crowd that came not for policy, but for punchline. Jimmy Kimmel stood center stage, smiling the way only late-night hosts do when they smell a perfect setup. Behind him flashed a still image of Karoline, frozen mid-sentence at the podium. "She says she's committed to the truth," he began, pausing for effect, which is refreshing, since nobody else in that building seems to know where to find it. The audience laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a ripple that grew louder as the monologue built momentum. Kimmel moved quickly from one topic to another. Karoline's age, her marriage to an older businessman, her defense of the president's complaints about water pressure. "He says the shower won't get his hair wet," Jimmy quipped. I believe Stormy Daniels said something similar. It was the kind of jab that cuts twice, once at Trump, once at his messenger. For the crowd in that studio, it was catharsis. For millions watching at home, it was comedy. But for Karoline, who had only just begun her public journey, it was a warning. The political stage is not the only one that matters. Comedy has always played a role in American politics. From Johnny Carson to Jon Stewart, jokes have helped people process chaos, call out hypocrisy, and cope with absurdity. But something changed in the Trump era. The jokes didn't just reflect the headlines, they became part of the narrative itself. The laugh lines now shaped perception just as much as any official statement. Jimmy Kimmel wasn't holding a press pass or briefing reporters, but his words reached more people than any White House memo. His punchlines didn't need fact checks. They carried the weight of shared frustration, wrapped in laughter. And that's where Karoline's challenge truly began. It wasn't just defending the administration in a room full of reporters. It was holding the line against a culture that had learned to dismiss her kind with a smirk. One clever joke could undo a week's worth of polished messaging. One viral clip could become the only thing the public remembered. This wasn't just a political clash, it was a cultural collision. And as the studio audience roared with laughter, Jimmy dropped one last blow. "Karoline Leavitt says she's here to speak For the truth, he said, feigning sincerity. That's great, because the truth could really use a good publicist right about now. The room erupted again, and far away, in that now familiar press room, Karoline may not have heard the applause, but she would soon feel the aftershocks. Because while policy fights one kind of war, comedy wages another. And once your credibility becomes a punchline, it takes more than a press release to reclaim it. But Karoline wasn't backing down. The laughter might have been loud, but her loyalty was louder. And soon, she would step up to defend Id not with a smirk, but with fire. The laugh came easily that night. Jimmy Kimmel had just delivered another zinger, this time not about Karoline's policies, not even her press conferences, but her personal life. She's married to a much older real estate magnate, he said with a wink, which, in this White House basically means ... you're hired. The audience roared. It was a clean hit, cleverly worded, and it landed exactly where he wanted. The soft spot where politics and personal judgment collide. Karoline wasn't the first political figure to have her relationship pulled apart on national television, but she may have been one of the youngest and, more importantly, one of the few whose marriage was turned into a punchline not because of scandal, but because it fit an old stereotype too well. A young woman, married to a wealthy older man, serving in a conservative administration. No evidence of wrongdoing, no impropriety, just optics. And optics, in modern media, can be louder than facts. It's a double standard that runs deep. A male staffer in the same role might be called strategic, well-connected, or wise beyond his years. But when it's a young woman, especially one who leans right, politically married to a successful man, the narrative shifts. Suddenly she's privileged, propped up, or, as the punchline implied, hired by proximity. What's rarely mentioned is the truth behind the headlines. Karoline grew up in a working-class family in New Hampshire. She worked in local TV. She hustled her way into national politics not through connections, but through campaigns, cold calls, and countless unpaid hours. Her marriage wasn't an elevator, it came after the climb. And yet, the moment she stepped into the national spotlight, her life became public property. The details that had nothing to do with her job, her age gap, her spouse's career suddenly became fodder for late-night laughs and Twitter threads. There's a lesson tucked quietly between those jokes. In modern media, a woman's ambition is still too often measured by the man standing next to her. Her voice can be dismissed, not because it lacks merit, but because someone assumes it must echo someone else's. That reality isn't unique to Karoline. It echoes in the careers of women across the political spectrum. AOC, Nikki Haley, Jen Psaki, different parties, different politics, same familiar pattern. When women rise, people ask who's lifting them, not what they're lifting. Karoline didn't publicly respond to the joke. She didn't issue a press release or tweet a fiery retort. Instead, she returned to the podium the next day, did her job, and let the work speak for itself. But something had shifted. This wasn't just political theater anymore. Her personal life was now fair game. The gloves were off, and she knew it. And just when the laughter faded, something else took its place, a historical stumble that would make headlines across 2 continents and turn her next press appearance into a history teacher's worst nightmare. Was meant to be a moment of patriotic pride, a bold defense of American strength on the global stage. Instead, it became a viral misstep that had historians sighing and French Twitter erupting with disbelief. During a routine White House press briefing, Karoline Leavitt was asked to comment on a statement from a European lawmaker. The official had suggested that the United States no longer represented the values embodied by the Statue of Liberty. It was, at most, a mild diplomatic jab, hardly headline material. But Karoline, with confidence and conviction, responded in a way that would send ripples far beyond the briefing room. My advice to that low-level French politician, she said, would be to remember that it's only because of the United States that the French aren't speaking German right now. She paused, proud of the line. It had punch, no doubt. But within hours, it also had backlash. Lots of it. Historians were quick to jump in. While it's true that American involvement in World War II helped liberate France from Nazi occupation, the idea that France would be speaking German today, without U.S. help, is a vast oversimplification of a complex war. More importantly, it ignored the contributions of French resistance fighters, allied nations, and decades of shared global sacrifice. French journalists responded with cutting sarcasm. One headline read, "America forgot history again." Popular French comedian joked that Karoline must have learned world history from a cheeseburger wrapper. Even some American media outlets couldn't resist piling on. A retired professor from Georgetown appeared on cable news, calling it a mic drop for people who never opened a history book. What stung most wasn't that she got a detail wrong, it was that the moment crystallized an image critics had been pushing from day one, a young press secretary speaking with confidence, but not always with care. This wasn't the first time someone in the White House had stumbled over world history, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But for Karoline, the timing was brutal. Coming on the heels of jokes about her marriage and loyalty, the remark felt like fuel for a growing fire. Was she in over her head? Yet the mistake also held something deeper, something more human. In a high-pressure role, live on camera, every word matters. And sometimes, in the rush to sound strong, we forget to be precise. We reach for applause lines instead of perspective. And when that happens, the truth gets traded for theatrics. There was no official apology. The administration doubled down, as expected. But the clip lived on, recirculated in classrooms, parodied in skits, and quietly used by critics to question her readiness for the world stage. For Karoline, it was a moment to absorb not just the fallout, but the lesson. Conviction means little if it's not paired with knowledge. And in politics, the louder the line, the harder the echo. She returned to the podium the next day, just as composed, but a touch more measured. The confidence was still there, but now, it came with a flicker of caution. It wouldn't be the last time she'd face a difficult question, and the next one wouldn't be about world history. It would be about numbers, specifically tariffs, and this time, the stumble wouldn't come from what she said, but how she said it. The question wasn't hostile. It wasn't loaded. It was the kind of thing every White House press secretary expects: straightforward, numbers-based, policy-focused. A reporter from the Associated Press raised his hand and asked Karoline Leavitt to explain how the president's new tariff policy would avoid raising costs for American consumers. It was a fair inquiry. After all, tariffs are taxes on imported goods, and those costs, economists often point out, usually land on the shoulders of the people doing the buying: regular Americans. Karoline paused. Her expression didn't change, but her tone did. "I'm sorry," she said. "Have you ever paid a tariff? Because I have." Then, instead of diving into facts or referencing a prepared statement, she leaned into frustration. "I think it's insulting that you're trying to test my knowledge of economics," she snapped, "and the decisions this president has made." The room stiffened. A few reporters exchanged glances. The question hadn't been framed as an attack. It didn't question her intelligence or her loyalty. It just asked for an explanation. But in that moment, Karoline didn't answer as a spokesperson. She answered as someone who felt cornered, and in politics, perception matters. Her defensiveness became the headline, not the tariffs, not the trade policy, just the tone. Clips of the exchange spread quickly. One was captioned, "She got asked a question and took it personally." Another stitched her reply over circus. Music late-night shows replayed the clip with raised eyebrows and mock surprise. Even some conservative commentators admitted, quietly, that the exchange didn't help. It wasn't about whether she knew the answer. It was about the choice she made and how she handled being challenged. That's what stayed with people. It's easy to forget, especially under pressure, that every press briefing is more than a conversation. It's a performance of credibility. Each answer isn't just for the room, it's for the country. And when emotion outruns clarity, when ego overtakes explanation, the room is lost. That moment, more than any before, revealed the weight Karoline was carrying. She wasn't just delivering policy, she was expected to defend it, justify it, and sometimes clean it up in real time. All while under a microscope. It's a role that chews through the season for someone so young. Every misstep felt magnified. To her credit, Karoline didn't walk out. She finished the briefing. She returned the next day. But the exchange over tariffs would linger as a quiet turning point: the day when her composure cracked, and her confidence, even if briefly, gave way to something more vulnerable: frustration. What followed next, though, wouldn't be about frustration. It would be about image. Because outside the press room, beyond the White House gates, her struggle was about to be remixed literally on a different stage, and the spotlight would belong to someone who didn't just comment on the chaos, but danced in it by now. The press briefings had taken on a rhythm. Questions came fast, answers came sharp. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium each day with practiced calm, delivering lines about trade, inflation, and America's place in the world. But outside that room, something entirely different was unfolding. At a campaign-style rally in Florida, Donald Trump took the stage like a man with something urgent to say. He paced, paused, then raised his voice. 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. I mean dead. The crowd cheered, but the words hung strangely in the air. He wasn't referencing war, or crisis, or pandemic. Just vibes. Then came the next line, the one that would live far beyond the rally. You wash your hands, you take a shower. In my case, I have to stand in the shower for 15 minutes, just to get my beautiful hair wet. It comes out drip, drip, drip. It's ridiculous. It wasn't the first time Trump had veered off script into plumbing policy, but this time, it landed differently. Maybe it was the way he said beautiful hair with complete sincerity, or maybe it was the fact that, in the middle of a debate over tariffs, international instability, and consumer prices, the President of the United States was talking about showerheads. Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel couldn't resist. That night, in front of a studio audience already warmed up and ready to laugh, Kimmel played the clip of Trump's drip, drip, drip rant. Then, with perfect comedic timing, he launched into a parody. "You wanted a Macho Man?" he said. "You got Taco Man." A mariachi remix of the Village People's Macho Man played in the background, but the lyrics had changed. Trump's voice was clipped in. Drip, drip, drip. Cartoon tacos rained down on screen. The crowd lost it. The segment wasn't just funny, it was brutal. Because in politics, ridicule cuts deeper than disagreement. And Kimmel didn't just mock Trump, he rebranded him. In one punchline, the image of the tough, no-nonsense leader was swapped out for a dripping, rambling caricature, worried more about water pressure than national priorities. The meme spread within hours. Taco Man trended on social media. TikTok creators danced to the remix. Even conservative influencers, usually quick to defend, stayed quiet. No one quite knew how to spin it. And through it all, Karoline remained silent. No comment. No correction. The next day, she stepped back behind the podium and talked about manufacturing growth. But the room wasn't fully listening. The story had shifted. Because while tariffs and trade deficits are complicated, humor isn't. The Taco Man moment crystallized a feeling many had sensed but hadn't put into words, that somewhere along the way, the White House had stopped being a source of leadership and had become a stage 4 spectacle. And the more the president embraced absurdity, the more the people defending him had to absorb the fallout. Karoline, whether she liked it or not, was now part of the punchline. But the real test wasn't what Jimmy Kimmel said next. It was how Trump would respond. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be calm, or strategic, or calculated. It would be exactly what we've come to expect: unfiltered and loud. For a man who's spent decades in the public eye, Donald Trump has always understood the power of a stage. Whether it was a rally, a courtroom, or a reality TV boardroom, he knew how to control a room, or at least dominate it. But something about late-night comedy, especially when it came from Jimmy Kimmel, seemed to crawl under his skin in a way few critics could. After the Taco Man parody exploded across the internet, Trump's silence was brief. Then, as predictably as sunrise, the storm arrived at a campaign stop in Ohio. He grabbed the mic, abandoned the teleprompter, and launched into one of his signature riffs. "Stupid Jimmy Kimmel," he said, eyes narrowed, voice rising, still hasn't recovered from his horrendous Oscars performance. Ratings in the toilet, one of the dumbest human beings ever. It wasn't policy, it wasn't defense, it was personal. He wasn't speaking as president. He was speaking as a man insulted on television, and he wanted revenge. He listed grievances, name-called, mocked, and growled. Then, as if to prove he'd been watching every word, he quoted lines from Jimmy's segment. "You call me Taco Man. You wish you had my hair, Jimmy?" The audience clapped, but not as loudly as usual. The jokes landed strangely. Some laughed, others just shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't tough guy Trump. This was something else: a man cornered by a comedian, a leader rattled by laughter. Later that night, he continued the tirade on social media. "Jimmy Kimmel suffers from TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Always has, always will." The post was shared by surrogates, echoed on certain news networks, and dissected in media circles. But outside of his base, the response was muted. The energy didn't stick. Because here's the quiet truth about moments like this. When leaders lash out at comedians, it doesn't look strong, it looks shaken. Comedians poke fun. It's what they do. But when a president spends days chasing down punchlines, it tells the country where his focus truly is. Not on jobs, not on diplomacy, on Jimmy Kimmel. End. For Karoline Leavitt, it was another weight quietly added to her shoulders. She hadn't made the joke. She hadn't played the music, but in press briefings, she would now be expected to answer for it, to spin the president's insults into strategy, to frame his fury as resolve. It was the cost of the job. Loyalty, without limits. There's a lesson tucked between the laughs and the rants. The louder someone reacts to mockery, the more power the mockery holds. Jimmy knew that. Trump proved it. But if Trump's reaction was predictable, what came next wasn't. Because Karoline wasn't just fielding press questions anymore. She was now at the center of a media storm, and soon, the story would shift again from presidential outbursts to her own performance. Under fire, not just on policy, but on truth itself. The job description never said she'd have to explain why the president was ranting about a late-night host, or why he kept talking about water pressure instead of inflation, or why his anger sounded louder than his plans. But somehow, that's exactly where Karoline Leavitt found herself day after day. Behind a podium, turning noise into message. In the days following Trump's Taco Man meltdown, the White House press briefings grew more tense. Reporters, sensing blood in the water, didn't just ask about policy, they asked about tone, intention, and leadership. One journalist raised a simple, cutting question. Does the president regret using his time to insult a comedian instead of addressing rising grocery prices? Karoline's response was quick, composed, and utterly predictable. "This administration is focused on delivering results for the American people," she said. "The president uses humor and candor to connect with voters, and, make no mistake, Americans appreciate a leader who's unafraid to speak his mind." She smiled. The line had been rehearsed. The words were airtight, but they didn't answer the question. And everyone in the room knew it. This was Karoline's role now. Not just to inform, but to smooth. Not to clarify, but to control. Her job wasn't about truth in its raw form, it was about shaping perception, polishing the jagged edges, and making chaos sound like strategy. In fairness, that's what every press secretary does to some degree. But in this administration, the gap between message and reality was growing wider by the day, and the spin required to bridge it was starting to look more like a performance than a press event. The public noticed clips of her carefully worded answers circulated online with sarcastic captions. The Real Housewives of the West Wing. One viral edit mashed up her press briefing with a laugh track, turning her responses into sitcom dialogue. The commentary wasn't always cruel, but it was constant. Even some conservative commentators began whispering doubts. One op-ed in a right-leaning blog posed the question bluntly, is Karoline spinning, or is she stuck? And that's the difficult truth about being the face of someone else's message. No matter how composed, how prepared, or how polished you are, eventually the message begins to wear on, especially when the facts beneath it start shifting like sand. But Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't complain. She kept showing up, her tone steady, her answers smooth. If the administration was a machine, she had become one of its most disciplined cogs. There's something admirable in that kind of loyalty, and something quietly heartbreaking too, because behind every soundbite, every rehearsed reply, there's a person trying to hold the center when everything around them is spinning. Still, for all the control Karoline tried to project, there was one thing she couldn't contain: the comedians. The louder she spoke in the press room, the louder the laughter got outside of it. And while Jimmy Kimmel had been the first to turn her into a punchline, he wouldn't be the last. Because when politics turns into performance, comedy becomes competition. And for Karoline, that meant the next big blow wasn't coming from a journalist or a policy expert, it was coming from a stage, under hot lights, with a live audience waiting to laugh. In Washington, power usually speaks in suits and scripts. It leans on data, leans into confidence, and keeps the press room under tight control. But outside those marble walls, there's another voice, less formal, more playful, and often far more powerful than anyone inside the West Wing wants to admit. Comedy. Jimmy Kimmel didn't run for office. He doesn't hold a press badge. Yet somehow, his monologue about showerheads and Taco Man managed to shape more public opinion than an entire week's worth of press briefings. Why? Because humor, when wielded well, isn't just a joke. It's a scalpel. It cuts through spin, exposes contradictions, and makes complicated things suddenly feel very simple. It doesn't just challenge the message, it rewrites the story. Karoline Leavitt found herself caught between those two worlds. In one, she was the disciplined mouthpiece of a president known for chaos. In the other, she was the subject of late-night punchlines and viral remixes. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more comedians like Kimmel twisted it right back. This wasn't a new dynamic in American politics. Just ask presidents who tangled with Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert. But in the age of social media, where clips spread faster than facts, the balance of narrative control had shifted. A single joke could dismantle a week of messaging. A single viral moment could undermine months of policy talk, and the White House knew it. You could see it in Trump's fury, in his name-calling, in the way he couldn't stop talking about Jimmy even when his advisors begged him to focus on inflation and jobs. You could hear it in Karoline's careful answers, avoiding the subject, while trying to spin it into strategy. But here's the real lesson. Power can make the rules, but it can't always shape the story. Not anymore, because stories today aren't just told in press rooms, they're told in sketches, memes, jokes, and TikToks. They're filtered through laughter and disbelief. And if those stories stick harder than the press secretary's talking points, it's not just embarrassing, it's a threat. That's why comedy matters. Not because it's funny, but because it reminds the powerful they don't own the audience. They have to earn it, every day. And in this battle between messaging and mockery, Karoline became something more than a spokesperson. She became a symbol. How fragile control really is, in a world where one well-timed joke can do more damage than a press leak. But as the laughter faded, another storm was already forming. And this one wasn't about comedy at all. It was about the truth, the raw, unfiltered kind that press secretaries try to shape but never fully contain. And the next time Karoline took the podium, she wouldn't just be asked about policy or punchlines. She'd be asked to defend something far more complicated, the administration's version of reality itself. Every press secretary faces the same quiet question, though it's rarely asked out loud. Are you speaking for the president, or do you believe in the words yourself? For Karoline Leavitt, that question grew louder with every briefing. At just 27, she had become the youngest person ever to hold the Joe Ban achievement no one could take from her. She had climbed fast, spoken clearly, and stayed loyal. But as the months wore on, and the contradictions piled up between policy and performance, truth and spin, the question became harder to ignore. One week, she was defending tariffs that economists across the board criticized. The next, she was rewriting a version of history in which France owed its freedom solely to American intervention. Then came the comedy storms, the viral parodies, the press room meltdowns. Through it all, Karoline kept showing up, brushing off challenges, reciting talking points, deflecting hard truths with practiced ease. But something shifted after the Taco Man saga and Trump's outburst against Jimmy Kimmel. People weren't just scrutinizing the president anymore, they were scrutinizing her. Was she echoing talking points, or did she genuinely believe the words she spoke? In one particularly tense exchange, a reporter asked her directly, "Do you support this president's personal attacks on journalists and entertainers?" She paused for a moment, just long enough for the room to feel it tanned, then gave her answer. "This president speaks his mind. My job is to communicate his vision for the country." It was safe, smart, but also hollow, because deep down people want to know who stands behind the podium. Not just the office but the person. Do they bend for power, or stand with principle? Are they there to protect a leader's imago, to represent the people's right to the truth? And that's the Karoline conundrum. She's poised, articulate, and deeply loyal. But in a White House built more on performance than policy, loyalty can become a trap. The more she defended, the more she risked becoming just another echo in the noise, another voice that explains but never questions, that smooths over cracks without ever asking why they're there in the first place. There's no easy answer. Maybe Karoline believes in what she says. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's just trying to do her job in an impossible environment. But one thing is clear. When history looks back, it won't just judge the president. It will judge those who stood beside him, microphone in hand, choosing every word. And as the next press briefing loomed, the world watched not just to hear the answers but to see whether Karoline would remain the voice of the Trump White House, or find her own. Because in the end, the story of this administration won't be written by its loudest speeches, but by the quiet choices made behind the podium. In the whirlwind of politics, comedy, and power, we followed Karoline Leavitt's journey from bold truth-teller to embattled press secretary, navigating a presidency steeped in spectacle. We watched as Jimmy Kimmel's sharp humor pierced through the spin, as Trump's outbursts turned personal, and as Karoline tried to hold steady at a podium that demanded both loyalty and poise. Her story is a reflection of something bigger, the fragile balance between narrative and reality, between defending the powerful and answering to the truth. At the heart of it all lies a question we should never stop asking: are our leaders echoing power, or advocating for people? Thank you so much for watching. If this story gave you insight, sparked a thought, or simply kept you curious, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories coming, raw, honest, and worth the time. Until next time, take care and we'll see you soon.